how much personal truth does it take to destabilize a thousand-year-old institution?
And, maybe more importantly, when does sharing that trauma, when does it become a strategic weapon in a global PR battle?
That is the central tension, I think, in Prince Harry's memoir, Spare. Before we get into it, we want to be clear about the mission for this deep dive.
Enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. More than just a summary, though we do include that, this feature examines how the author shapes his argument, how he builds influence, and how he earns, or maybe loses, your trust.
We want to give you the tools to read with sharper insight and, really, with greater discernment. Should you read this book? This should help you decide.
It's also, I have to say, excellent for aspiring writers trying to understand narrative strategy. If you find this expanded format valuable, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback really does help guide our future content.
And today we're diving into Spare, because this book isn't just a simple recollection. It's a very carefully positioned act of what you could call reputational self-authorship.
Right. It's designed to fundamentally reframe his public image.
To move him from, say, an entitled royal to a deeply wounded but evolving outsider.
And that reframing is absolutely key because it simultaneously indicts the monarchy and the media that he argues basically manufactured the pain in his life.
You're experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis. So let's start with the speaker himself, who is the Prince Harry of this book. Because he is, well, he's a meticulously constructed persona.
He is. He's presented in, I'd say, three main lights. The traumatized child of intense media intrusion, the soldier with frontline Afghanistan service, and then finally, the disillusioned spare who chooses exile.
And that construction is the absolute foundation of his credibility, right?
Yeah.
His ethos. It's what makes us lean in and listen.
It is. We have to talk about the ghostwriter, J.R. Marringer. His literary skill gives that persona this compelling, polished coherence. It really lends substantial weight to Harry's voice.
It makes it feel like testimony.
Exactly, like sworn testimony.
And the real power, I think, comes from the fact that he is an insider. I mean, think about his background. Eton, Sandhurst, his proximity to the monarch.
Right.
This status grants him a kind of descriptive authority on royal life, on military life, that very few people can actually challenge.
So even when some of the small details are disputed in the press, he's still speaking from a place of lived, experiential knowledge. No one can take that away.
His insider status is the engine of trust. But what about the timing? The exigence, as it's called. This was published after his exit from the royal family.
In the middle of an absolute tabloid war, it functions as a global, permanent counter-narrative.
It's the ultimate mic drop against what he calls institutional silencing.
And the purpose seems dual, doesn't it? It's personal reputation repair for sure, but it's also an attempt to expose this structurally abusive relationship between the crown and the press.
He's trying to communicate the psychic cost, the cost of being the spare, to a global audience that has only ever seen the privilege.
But this narrative creates an ethical tension.
A big one.
While the credibility of this suffering insider is powerful, critics immediately pointed out moments of, let's say, factual fuzziness. Things like the precise details around his military kill count, and a fair bit of self-excultation, especially around his past use of offensive language.
So we're presented with this powerful story of pain, but maybe a slightly uneven approach to personal accountability.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
And for the critical reader, that tension really reveals some blind spots in his moral responsibility, even while we're accepting his account of his own suffering.
Okay, so if the credibility is a bit complicated, the emotional appeal is the undeniable engine of this book. It's visceral.
It absolutely is. You're persuaded less by formal proof or logic, and more by the immersive experience of his suffering under these immense systemic pressures. The story just hits you.
That's really the analytical heart of Spare, isn't it? The reliance on the trauma plot.
Oh, heavily. The shocking loss of Diana, the spectacle of that funeral, the delayed grief, and then later PTSD and suicidal ideation. It all goes back to that original trauma.
And the style of the narrative forces you to inhabit that pain. It's not telling, it's showing.
It's all scene-based narration, walking behind the coffin, those cold, distant family confrontations, that constant feeling of being hunted by the media.
Especially once he meets Meghan.
Right. The whole point is to make you feel his humiliation, his fear, his
rage. You don't just observe it, you're meant to experience the stress with him.
And this emotional appeal, it does serve a higher purpose. It acts as a kind of moral lever.
How so?
Well, The raw vulnerability supports genuinely humane ends, things like normalizing therapy, naming precipice and racism as toxic forces, and, critiquing the whole idea of a hereditary hierarchy.
But there's an analytical trap there. When does legitimate, absolutely necessary testimony about harm, when does it risk tilting into what feels like a litany of grievances?
When does effect outrun reflection?
Exactly. When does the feeling of it all overwhelm a deeper analysis?
And that raises the key question. When does testimony about harm become rhetorically over-indexed on victimhood? If the entire focus is on the feeling of being victimized, does that shift the narrative away from accountability?
Or even away from a really robust critique of the system itself.
Precisely.
That distinction is crucial, and it's something we need to get into. But first, just a quick note.
If you are enjoying this deep dive, please remember you can find more of our synthetic critical analysis on our YouTube channel. Just look for Mindful Moments.
That's our YouTube channel, offering AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all designed to inspire reflection and rational thought.
Okay, so let's dig into that narrative logic. How does the book actually build its argument?
It's interesting because Spare has very few formal evidence-based arguments. Its logic is almost entirely narrative. It's built on causality.
Explain that.
Well, if you, the reader, accept his foundational causal chain, that the monarchy plus the tabloids created this toxic family distortion, which led directly to his personal breakdown.
Then his exit seems rational.
Not just rational, necessary. It feels like an act of survival.
And the narrative supports this inductively, right? Through patterns.
Exactly. Anecdotal patterns, repeated leaks to the press, the family refusing to correct false or racist reports about Meghan, and that consistent unequal treatment between the heir and the spare.
So all these individual stories build up to support the implicit thesis that the institution is willing to sacrifice individuals, even its own family members, to preserve its public image.
And the structure of the book reinforces this cycle of trauma. It's in 3 parts: childhood, military, and then love and rupture. But it's recursive.
That recursive element is so crucial. It means the unprocessed trauma from his mother's death shapes every single conflict that comes later.
So later events just become variations on that single theme of struggle and eventually awakening.
It's like looking at everything through a trauma-colored lens.
And the style is engineered for connection. The prose is clean, it's cinematic, which we can credit to Moeringer. But it works because it creates this conversational intimacy. Especially with his own audiobook narration. The eye of the book feels like raw, direct testimony.
Not a sanitized royal communique.
Not at all. It collapses the distance between a prince and a regular reader. That feels like he's confiding in you.
And the metaphors do so much work. The heir and spare framing is obvious, but also the chess pieces being sacrificed and that powerful motif of hunted animals.
Which connects his own life directly back to his mother's death. I found the framing of the institutions themselves to be the most fascinating part. The monarchy isn't just a family. It's a rigid, almost corporate system.
A system that has to prioritize image and press management, that mandate to protect the crown at all costs.
And it warps all the relationships inside it.
And then you have the tabloids as the second system. Predatory, often racist, and economically rewarded for causing chaos.
He makes a really compelling case that these two systems are in a symbiotic but totally destructive relationship.
Especially for the women who marry in. He uses Diana and Meghan as his primary examples.
What's so interesting, though, is his rhetorical restraint. He pulls his punches, in a way.
He stops short of calling for abolition.
Right.
No overt Republican argument.
None. He actually affirms his belief in the magic of the crown, its symbolic value, while at the same time narrating its deforming, human-crushing effects.
That's a very clever strategic choice. By not going full Republican, he keeps moderate readers on board. He invites them to just ask the question.
Can an institution that demands this level of sacrifice coexist with human flourishing and modern ideas of equality?
Yeah. It's a powerful question.
So let's get into the critical evaluation. For a critical reader, the strength of this book is undeniable. It's a case study in how institutions and media can normalize dehumanization.
And it does so along clear lines of class, gender, and race.
And by putting therapy and trauma front and center, Spare really challenges that traditional stiff upper lip model of British masculinity.
It absolutely does. It legitimizes vulnerability as a public stance. It insists that even privileged people are owed care and autonomy, not just perpetual sacrifice.
But we have to talk about the logical weaknesses. the contradictions that critics jumped on immediately.
The big one being the charge of tu quoque.
The pot calling the kettle black.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Harry condemns media intrusion and the entitlement of royalty, but he is simultaneously leveraging his royal story and his private life for enormous commercial power.
He's monetizing the very pain he's condemning.
And that creates a risk, right? A risk of being accused of criticizing a behavior while participating in a related form of it.
It creates a cognitive dissonance for the reader, for sure. Then there's the critique of special pleading, where explanation starts to sound a lot like an excuse.
The focus often shifts to the impact of his past behavior on his own reputation, rather than on fully acknowledging who he might have harmed.
Right. How he was harmed by the fallout.
And this is where that focus on personal injury can sideline a broader systemic critique.
Go on.
Well, racism, for example, is framed mainly as the harm done to Meghan. Class inequity is framed as a constraint on royal freedom.
So by centering his own story, he misses a chance to make a bigger ethical critique that applies to less privileged people facing those same systems.
Right.
Ultimately, the book gives us a huge amount of information grouping details on royal life, family fights, military incidents.
But the real takeaway is the understanding. Philosophically, Spare makes this implicit claim that your identity isn't inherent. It's co-authored by the institutions you serve and the audiences who consume your story.
And that reclaiming your own story, as he's trying to do, is a precondition for moral agency. It's an argument for being critically literate about power.
So the final synthesis the debate the book leaves us with is this. Does Spare successfully expose a structural injustice that needs fixing?
Or does it mainly succeed in rebranding one man within a system he still fundamentally profits from?
That's the question.
And a final thought for you to mull over. If the entire architecture of the monarchy is built on duty, silence, and sacrifice, what is the moral responsibility of the person who chooses self-preservation, who chooses an autonomous voice over that institutional sacrifice?
Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.